Hello and welcome to the Scatterbolt channel, and today let me show you guys my high-end PC build guide for 2023. So this is one of the first ones I've done in a while that features some higher end components like those from PNY, Corsair, Nvidia, and of course Height with their new Y40 case. So in today's build guide, I'm gonna go ahead and show you guys how to put together this computer step by step, the parts going inside of it, how to install Windows and graphics card drivers, then the gaming performance possible on this level of a gaming PC, and then finishing up with my final thoughts on this high-end PC build guide for 2023. So before we get started, I just want to let you know that all of the parts I talk about in this build guide will be linked in the description below if you want to check out any of these for yourself. And with that, another thank you to PNY and Nvidia for sponsoring this build guide. Okay, so to build this computer, you're gonna need an 8 GB or bigger flash drive for your Windows bootable media device that you're gonna use to install Windows onto this gaming PC. If you want a video tutorial for how to create one of those, then check the description below or the card on screen. Then you need a regular Phillips head screwdriver for most things. And then for our M.2 SSD, you'll need a smaller Phillips screwdriver like this Phillips head 1 screwdriver. So let's start with the CPU, and we have chosen the new Intel Core i5-13400F. So it is going to be a little bit of a step up from the 12400 in terms of multi-threaded performance. And there it is. This is on the LGA 1700 socket as well, and we have the correct motherboard to pair it up with. So I'm confident that that 10-core CPU is going to fully utilize the RTX 4070 Ti in this build guide, and it's also going to be additionally helpful for any multi-threaded applications with those additional E-cores that you don't find on the 12400. And then here is the motherboard. We have the Gigabyte B760 Gaming X. This is a DDR4 motherboard, so we are saving a little bit money in that aspect, but still nothing to worry about. So this motherboard actually doesn't cost a whole lot, which is why I chose it. It's ATX, and it's going to support that 13th gen processor out of the box. Now in this motherboard box, you're given some additional things like this Wi-Fi adapter, which we will need. Then we're given some additional M.2 screws, which you don't necessarily need because some already come on the motherboard. Here is a link to the manual required for this motherboard, which you can scan with this little code here with your phone. Here is a SATA cable. You don't need this for this build guide. And that's it. So before we jump onto installing these accessories onto the motherboard, let's go ahead and talk about the PNY peripherals we have with this build guide, starting with their 32 gigabytes of DDR4 3600 megahertz RGB RAM. So we're gonna have 4 total sticks in this gaming PC, which is really awesome. Again, this is their Accelerate gaming lineup of RAM, so we do have that higher end XMP profile we can tap into for more performance. And then as far as RGB goes, this can be synced up with any RGB software from Asus, Gigabyte, ASRock, or whatever motherboard manufacturer you work with. So that is the RAM, and now let's go ahead and talk about the main storage we're gonna use, which is the PNY CS3140 M.2 SSD, and this comes in the 1 terabyte variant, my bad. So this is really cool because it's PCI Gen 4.0, TLC, comes with a built-in DRAM controller. Sequential read is up to 7,500 megabytes per second, and sequential write is around 5,000 megabytes per second. So very impressive indeed. Which for this build guide, although we're using the 1 terabyte model, I recommend the 2 terabyte because that is going to be in the price range for this high-end build guide. Okay, now let's go ahead and start installing all of these items onto the motherboard. So let's go ahead and start with the CPU. One thing I want you to note is that here on the actual CPU socket, there's a triangle right here. On the bottom left of the socket, this is gonna help align the CPU to where you need to actually put it in. So here again is our 13400F, and here on the CPU, if you can see it well, there is that same sort of triangle on the bottom left, and we just need to line the two up. All right, so let's go ahead and install this. So open up this little latch. Then drop down your CPU onto the pins. There we go, should be effortless. Give it a little jiggle, make sure it's all the way in there. Then put down this bracket, and then be prepared to clamp down this lever. And this is gonna squish in the pins on the motherboard to the CPU. So next up, let's go ahead and mess with the RAM. And this is really cool because we have 4 sticks of RAM to work with in this build guide. So there's no need to worry about placement. Although if we had 2 sticks, we put them on these 2 slots that are farthest from the motherboard. Click this in, Now for our next step on this motherboard, we're gonna go ahead and install our M.2 SSD. So go ahead and grab your Phillips head 1 screwdriver and unscrew this little screw right here, right below the CPU. That is out. Remove this. Now one thing to note, there's this little plastic slip here on the M.2 heat shield. Go ahead and remove this. Put that aside for now. Here's our M.2 SSD. Now let's go ahead and put it in on the slot right here. So this will only go in one way. Can't see it that well, but there is a little notch here on the actual socket. So that is in. Let's go ahead and put back on the M.2 heat shield. All right, that is in. So this is what your motherboard should look like after installing the CPU, the RAM, and our M.2 SSD. And now let's go ahead and move on to putting this into the PC case. All right, so guess what? I actually don't know how to start taking apart this PC case so we can install our motherboard. So once again, I want to point out that if you are confused on anything in this build guide, please refer to the manuals found in the case, found in the motherboard. You know the drill. If you don't know something, refer to the manual. So I went ahead and pulled this off. All right, we got the front side panel off. So this is what's gonna plug into the top slot of our motherboard, and then here's where our PNY RTX 4070 Ti will go. So here is a manual, but there are some more things in this PC case we gotta check out, like this little box right here on the bottom of the case. There we go. All right, here's our little utility box. Let's see if there's anything important we need in here. So we are given some screws needed to complete this build guide, like those for any SATA SSDs or hard drives, which we don't need in this build guide. This is for our motherboard, which it says on the baggie, it says MB, that means motherboard. And then here are some screws for our power supply. On the baggie, it says PSU. Here's a little audio splitter for this PC case in case you wanted to plug in anything analog into this PC case because it only has one audio jack. So we will need to install a power supply later. So let's go ahead and grab these power supply screws. We will need to install our motherboard into the PC case, which is the next step. So let's go ahead and grab these motherboard screws. So the last thing you might be wondering about when you open up this PC case is what the heck are all of these cables? Well, these all stem from here. And if you look at the front of the PC case, these are your front I/O buttons and ports. So we have our power button, our 2 USB ports, a USB Type-C port, and our audio jack. So installing the motherboard in this PC case is a little bit different because we have our PCI extension slot right here. So we need to go ahead and remove this, bend it back, and then put in the motherboard into the PC case. And once again, instructions are all in the manual. So let's go ahead and unscrew this. So now we can go ahead and bend this back like that. And now let's drop down our motherboard. But before we do that, let's go ahead and count the amount of standoffs we have in the PC case. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 screws already pre-installed. And on the motherboard, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 holes we need to cover off with standoffs in the PC case, and all 9 of those are already pre-installed in the PC case, so we don't need to add any more standoffs, which is excellent. Let's drop in our motherboard. I'm gonna go ahead and hold it by this. And let's scooch this in. All right, now let's go ahead and line up the standoffs with the holes on the motherboard. Okay, that is in. So you remember our motherboard screws from inside the PC case in that little box. Let's go ahead and take these out now and use them to screw into the motherboard. So grab your Phillips head 1 screwdriver and screw in one corner halfway. Don't fully insert the screw. Just get it a little bit tight, but don't tighten it all the way. And then let's go to the corner here. Remember, don't screw in all the way. I'll show you what we're doing in a bit. Let's go to the other corner. Now we can go ahead and start individually tightening each of these screws across the motherboard in a crisscross formation. That way, there's equal pressure on all sides of the motherboard and there's no possibility of bending it. Let's go to this corner, tighten this one up. Go to this corner, make sure this is tightened up. Now the last thing we're gonna go ahead and do is that we're actually going to go ahead and insert the PCI slot to the extender here on the Height Y40 so we can have that vertically mounted GPU. So here's our top slot right here. Open that up. Ooh, and it looks like we need to move this down one slot. So let's go ahead and unscrew this PCI slot. And just like the RAM, this should click in all the way. That is latched in. Okay, and with your motherboard installed, now let's go ahead and install our AIO, aka our water cooler for that i3-13400F. And for this build guide, we have opted to go with the Corsair H115i Elite Capellex XT. This is a 280mm AIO from Corsair that looks very fancy and nice, which is adequate and in line with the rest of the components used in this build guide. Here are our two 140mm fans. Here is our actual radiator block. Ooh, this is our controller. We will actually need this later on, so that's handy. And here's the mounting accessories for actually putting this onto the socket. Now, one thing to note is I understand that not all of you are gonna get this exact AIO if you were to say copy this build guide, so I won't be going over the exact steps that I do for installing this, but we're gonna go ahead and put this here on the side of the height Y40. So the first thing we're gonna do is that we're gonna go ahead and install the fans onto the radiator. And do note that the orientation of these fans will matter. So we're gonna have it like this, so that way the cable can wrap around this little hole right here and we can hide the cable. And note that all the screws for this came in the box as well, right here. And to actually screw these into the radiator, we're gonna use these longer screws. Okay, and a little bit of time has passed. We're just screwing in these fans onto the radiator with these longer screws, as you can see right here. And just like the motherboard, I'm putting all of these in halfway, but once they're all in, then I'll go ahead and tighten each of these individually. So that is that done. We'll put this heavy CPU block right there. There we go. And now let's go ahead and grab some regular screws for screwing in the radiator into the PC case. So we're gonna grab 8 of these screws, and this is 1 thread. We have 6 more threads to go. So after a little bit, we went ahead and screwed in all 8 of these screws onto the back of the height Y40. If we flip around the case, you can see we have the AIO right here. And now with our fans mounted to the left, we're gonna go ahead and thread these in, all fine and dandy. And as you can see, eventually we'll go ahead and place this right here. But before we do that, we need to go ahead and install the CPU backplate. So we got a few baggies here. We have Intel 2011, that's not our socket. We have Intel 1200, that's not our socket. We're using that 13th gen CPU, which is LGA 1700, which again, you can find in the box of the CPU. So these are the right screws to go with. Here's our bracket, and now let's go ahead and flip back around this PC case. And look at that, height were nice enough to give you a wide cutout of the back of the motherboard, so you can easily drop in one of these. So let's go ahead and get our CPU bracket screws right here. See if we can put one in. All right, let me go ahead and flip this around for you guys. So we got one of these screws in. Let's go ahead and get the other one. That is in. And if we flip around the PC case, here is the CPU bracket fully installed, and it is in there. So here is the back of the CPU pump, the water block. Let me go ahead and take this off. So you can see there's thermal paste already pre-applied. So no need to supply your own. And this is gonna go on fairly simply. Line it up with all 4 screw holes. Here are the screws that came with that same baggie that we used to install the fans onto the radiator and the radiator onto the case. This is what we're gonna use to actually mount the CPU block onto the 13400F. Screw in one side. Again, not all the way. And let's get the other corner. That way this is in. Okay, and now we've got all 4 of these screws helping mount the bracket to the CPU. So let's tighten that one up all the way. Tighten this one up all the way. Tighten this one up all the way. And tighten this one up all the way. And there you have it. Okay, so the last thing we need to do with the AIO is to eventually install this RGB and fan controller for our 2 fans from the AIO. And we're gonna install some more fans in the future with this 3-pack of AF120s from Corsair. But I want to wait to do that because, again, we're going to install the fans later, but we need to install the power supply next, and this is a very interesting one. So this is the RMX 1000X, not the RMX, RM1000X, and this is part of their new Shift series of power supplies, and you're going to see why it's called Shift. All right, here it is. So this is what's so cool about this new power supply. This is what you're typically used to seeing, right? We have the power outlet on the back, but on the other side, we should be able to see the ports, but they aren't there because they've been moved to the side. So now if we were to say put this power supply inside the PC case like this, all of our ports will be accessible from the back side of the PC case. And here are all the cables, which I'll tell you guys which ones we're gonna use. And then here's your main power cable that'll hook up from the back of the power supply to your wall socket. Keep this one on handy somewhere. So you remember these power supply screws that we found with the HiTY40 in that little cardboard box? We're finally gonna need these to actually install the power supply into this PC case. So let's go ahead and open these up, put these out. Here's our RM1000X. Let's go ahead and slide this in here. All right, and now here on the back side of the PC case, let's go ahead and line up the holes of the power supply to the holes in the PC case. There's our thread. I'm gonna insert one of these screws. Let's get this other one right here. Awesome. Okay, so with all 4 of these power supply screws now into the power supply, connecting this to the case, just keep this on the O. When you're ready to boot up this computer, then we'll switch it to the line. But if you never need to turn on your computer, like say if you're gonna be away from it for a while, just keep it on the O. And with that installed, now we have the luxury of accessing all the ports from the power supply here. So now let's go ahead and plug in these cables. So let's start with our big chunky motherboard power connector. So here it says motherboard. So we'll go ahead and plug this in right here. All right, that is in. Now let's go ahead and plug in our CPU power cable. There you go. As a reminder, that says CPU. Plug in the other end into here. So let's see. PCIe/CPU, PCIe/CPU. Let's go ahead and plug into one of the ports. There we go. Now let's go ahead and plug in the 12-volt power connector that we'll need to power up the RTX 4070 Ti. This is what's gonna go into the graphics card. This is what's gonna go into the power supply here. Let's go ahead and use this where it says PCIe. There we go. And finally, to power up the RGB and fan controller for our AIO and our fans, let's go ahead and plug this in. So this says SATA, and now we have all of our power cables needed to power up this computer plugged into the power supply. So I'm gonna hold off on putting the RGB and fan controller on the back side of the PC case because we have some more Corsair fans to install, and these are all gonna go along the top. And this is Corsair's new AF120 RGB Elite fans. This is going to act as the primary exhaust for this system, exhausting a lot of hot air from the top of the case. And these very much look luxurious, which is again appropriate for this kind of build. So we probably won't need this, but here are our 3 fans. Let's go ahead and take these out. Number 1, number 2, and number 3. Now the screws we'll need to install these onto the top of the PC case are actually found in here. Here's for one of them. Here's for the second one, and here's for the third one. Now we are given our own RGB/fan controller here, but we don't need to worry about that because we're already given one here. So we're gonna go ahead and install each of these fans onto the top of the PC case, but before we do that, we're actually gonna go ahead and skip a step. We're gonna go ahead and install the CPU power cable. Remember, this guy that says CPU right here. And we're gonna put this on this power connector here on the top left of the motherboard. And we're gonna put that power connector here on the top left of the motherboard. That way, when we eventually install our fans, we won't have to worry about it. So let's go ahead and take this, flip it around. And note there's a notch on the actual connector and a latch on the cable. And this should only go in one way, and you should hear it click. So now with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start screwing in our fans, which, by the way, we're gonna have the cable end portion of each fan going through this little slot right here. That way it's clean. So we'll go ahead and do this. Already filter in the cables through this little slot. And then we'll have the fan like this. Okay, so a little bit of time has passed. We have installed all 3 fans here on the HiTY40 on the top of the PC case. And we have all of the cables being routed through here. Let me go ahead and make that a little more clear for you guys. So at this point, we have everything installed that we need other than the graphics card, which we'll touch later. But for the moment, I feel like it's important that we hook everything up and then get to the graphics card. But this is what the system kind of looks like right now. It is gonna be so sick when this thing is completed. Oh, this red and black is gonna be cool. So now you guys can see what we're gonna work with right here. We have the cables from the fans right here. We have the cables from the fans on the AIO here. Then we have our power supply cables, one of which we already plugged in for the CPU. And then we have all of our front IO cables. So for the purposes of this tutorial, we're gonna go ahead and divide this into 3 sections. And we're gonna start with all of the fans here by finally installing the RGB and fan controller from our AIO. And this is what we use to hook up everything from here. Let's go ahead and quickly mount this onto the back of the PC case before we move on. There we go. And we're gonna mount it like this. We're gonna put it here. We're gonna give it some pressure. And there we go. So first, let's go ahead and start plugging in all the fans, all the Corsair fans into our singular RGB and fan controller. So with each fan, they come with 2 different connectors. So one of these says RGB hub. This is the RGB that is going to be controlled in the fan. And then one of these is the regular fan header with this little black tab here. This is what actually turns on and controls the fan speed. And on the controller here, we have the top section for all the RGB connectors, because right there it probably says RGB. And on the bottom here, it just says fans. And this is where all the fan headers go. And coincidentally, we have 5 total Corsair fans in this PC case. So we'll go ahead and use 5 of these slots on each. So let's go ahead and plug in our first fan into the first RGB header here on top. And then let's plug the fan header from the other fan, or from that same fan, right here on the bottom. There we go. It's gonna get a little bit messy, but we'll go ahead and plug in each of these fans. And I recommend having the same set of cables for each port. Header on bottom. And now we have all 5 fans, all 5 Corsair fans plugged into our fan controller. But the other thing you need to note, we still need to plug on and power the RGB and fan controller and hook it up to the motherboard with this USB port. So for the SATA power connector here, let's go ahead and grab one of our SATA power connectors from the power supply and we'll plug this in. It doesn't matter which port you put it in. And then for our USB header that will plug into the motherboard, we'll go ahead and thread this into the interior of the PC case. So we'll put this over here for the moment. And with that, that is all of your fans and your fan controller done with this PC, other than hooking up the USB cable from this to the motherboard. So let's go ahead and plug in our power cables, starting with the motherboard power connector, this big chunky boy right here. Here's our latch. There's a little notch here on the power connector, so this will only go in one way. So this is made connection, and now let's go ahead and click this in all the way. There you go, that is firmly in. So next is where you typically plug in your CPU power cable into the motherboard. But as for just this build guide, since we needed to install these top fans right here, I really recommend you take care of this before installing these top fans. So make sure you have the CPU power connector plugged into the motherboard, and just like everything else, this should only go in one way. So this is our last power connector other than the SATA power connector, which we just used to power up the fan and RGB controller. This is what we're gonna eventually plug into the RTX 4070 Ti. So just leave this on the front of the case because the graphics card is soon gonna go right here. So these 2 cables right here are coming from your CPU water block, and we will have to take care of these because one of these, this big one here, is your RGB, and this other one is the actual header for the pump, so it knows when to run. And I'll go ahead and take care of these right now, as you can see on video, but we'll plug one of these into the CPU opt header on the motherboard, and the other one onto the back of the RGB and fan controller on the right side. Okay, and now with our power supply cables and our fan and RGB cables from the fans taken care of, as well as the CPU block and the actual fan and RGB controller, now we can finally get to the front IO cables. So like our USB 3.0 cable, our USB-C cable, our front panel connector for our power button, our HD audio connector for our audio jack, and an additional fan that is on the bottom of the case, which I just found out now exists. So let's go ahead and plug all of these into the motherboard, but the first one we can take care of is this additional fan that we're gonna plug into our last remaining fan header slot on this controller here. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with our USB 3.0 header, this blue boy right here. There's a little notch here on the connector that's gonna line up with this, or the little latch here that's gonna line up with this notch. It'll only go in one way. And make sure that's in like that. Next is our USB-C connector, which we're gonna go ahead and plug in right here. There we go, now we got that plugged in. Put those off to the side. Next is our front panel connector, which is gonna go right there. And luckily with the height Y40, we have all of the front panel pins already in one single connector, so we don't need to plug in any individual ones, which is super nice. So this should just go in right here if you follow the pins, just like that. Now you remember our RGB and fan controller? So this is the USB connector that bridges off from that, which we're gonna connect to the motherboard to allow us to actually control the RGB from our software. And we're gonna plug this into one of the USB ports on the motherboard, because this says USB. And we can find those down here, just around, because this will only go in one way. And then the last front panel connector we're gonna deal with is this HD audio connector, which is gonna go on the bottom left of the motherboard. Again, this will only go in one way. Okay, and with that, you should have everything plugged in with the exception of the 12-volt power cable for the graphics card and this additional fan header for this fan right here, which I'm not gonna bother with because I'm gonna take it out anyways. But with now everything plugged in, we're gonna move on to the final part of building this PC, which is the graphics card. All right, and for the final piece to this high-end gaming PC build guide is the PNY GeForce RTX 4070 Ti. This is gonna be the main bread and butter behind all the gaming or any additional studio or rendering work we're gonna do on this computer. Again, it's got 12 gigabytes of DDR6X memory, and this is an Nvidia graphics card, so it comes with the full suite of features that you want out of something like this. And then again, this is the PNY card, so it comes with the Epic X RGB cooler on it. So one of the main reasons why I chose the height Y40 in the first place, obviously, is because of the PCI extension cable, so we can have a vertically mounted graphics card, because look at this thing. Oh, and look right there. There's our single 12-volt power connector that is ready for us to plug into the graphics card. So now let's go ahead and actually install this. All right, now let's go ahead and install the graphics card, finally. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna count how many PCI slots this 4070 Ti takes up. It takes up 1, 2, 3, like these. So we'll go ahead and take out these 3 slots here on the Y40. Let's drop this in. Line it up with the PCI slot here on the bottom of the card. It'll be a little bit, oh, one thing. Make sure to take this off. So now we can actually plug in this into here. And if you can see right here on the bottom, this is going to make contact with that PCI slot, and this should just drop in. All right, this is ready. You should be able to hear a click, and that means it's in all the way. Okay, and we've gone ahead and inserted the graphics card. We made connection with the PCI Express slot, and now this thing is all the way in. Let's finally plug in our 12-volt power connector here at the top. This has a latch on the actual connector, and there's a notch on the graphics card, so this should only go in one way. There you go. Make sure there's a click, and make sure you hear that. Make sure that is firmly in. And if you remember, we unscrewed those PCI Express covers for the graphics card. Let's go ahead and reuse the screws from those and screw in the graphics card into the PC case, finally. And there we go. And now you are completely done building this computer. So now let's go ahead and get our monitor, keyboard, and mouse set up, and our Windows bootable media device and our USB drive, and let's finally turn on, boot up this computer, and install Windows and graphics card drivers. Okay, so let's go ahead and install Windows 11 on the gaming PC. So we'll hit next, hit install now. Here we're gonna go ahead and enter in our Windows 11 key. I've already bought one before, so I'll go ahead and enter that in. All right, that has gone through. I'm gonna go ahead and hit I accept, next, custom. We'll hit on that, hit next, and there we go. Okay, so after waiting for a little bit, you should see this screen here. Go ahead and choose your country, choose your keyboard layout. We don't need a second one. Now let's go ahead and connect to our network. Again, this computer has Wi-Fi, so we're gonna go ahead and take care of this now. We'll go ahead and skip naming our device, doesn't matter. We'll set this up for personal use unless you have other designated uses. Let's go ahead and sign in to our Microsoft account. So if you don't have one, now's the time to create one, but fortunately, I already have one. So I'll go ahead and log in. I will choose not to sync from a previous OneDrive. So I'll set this up as a new device. We'll go ahead and create a pin. It could be whatever. I like to use ASDF. Then for all of these privacy settings, I turn them off because they're unnecessary and they're extra processors running in the background. And like this, I don't care. I'll skip all of that. I don't need Android. I don't want any of this. I don't want Game Pass. And like that, we'll soon be greeted with the home desktop for Windows 11. All right, there are two more things we need to do before we are ready to get to gaming. So first thing first, open up your web browser. We'll go ahead and install the Gigabyte Control Center because this will help maintain our motherboard utilities, any Wi-Fi drivers, anything like that. It'll be useful, so why not? There we go. We'll go ahead and agree to this. Looks good. And while that is running, let's go ahead and download our graphics card drivers. Now, once again, we're using that PNY GeForce RTX 4070 Ti Accelerate Edition graphics card. And to install the drivers for that, it's pretty simple. Type in RTX 4070 Ti drivers into whatever web browser you want. The top link should direct you to the official website, or actually not this one. We'll type in Nvidia drivers, go to official drivers, then let's go ahead and select the RTX 4070 Ti Windows 11, then we'll hit download. Hit download again, and we'll go ahead and let this run. All right, let's go ahead and open up this file. Hit yes, okay, hit yes. We accidentally hit that twice, we'll let this finish up. We'll go ahead and download the Nvidia graphics card driver and GeForce Experience, hit express. Okay, the installer has finished. Let's go ahead and, we actually don't have to launch GeForce Experience now, but this is all good to go. And with that, the final thing we need to do is we need to exit out of this and restart our computer. Now, as soon as you do this, I want you to spam the F2 or the delete key on your keyboard. This way we can enter the BIOS. All right, so right here, we can see it says XMP disabled. We don't want that, we want to enable it. So click on that and Profile 1 should load up. And with that done, save and exit. Yes, and with that, you are good to get to gaming. Okay, let's go ahead and show you the gaming performance of this high-end gaming PC with the RTX 4070 Ti, starting with Witcher 3. Now, there's a reason why I chose this game, is because there's a lot of features you can tap into with the RTX 4070 Ti that can increase or even enhance your gaming experience. Now, right now, I've got the game running just pretty default. It's basic. There's no ray tracing. There's no DLSS. There's no Nvidia Reflex. But I'll go ahead and turn on each of these features one by one and show you what it looks like. So let's pass by this bridge. The frame rate is in the top left. We're getting 86 frames per second. Hopefully we're welcomed here. I have never played Witcher 3 before, actually. Hopefully I'm allowed here. But the game could look better. So let's go ahead and start with our first feature. All right, let's go into video, graphics, and let's do our first thing, which is turning on DLSS. So this is basically going to increase the frame rate of your game through the means of applying, So first, let's go ahead and show off DLSS to take place of our anti-aliasing. So this is a way of basically increasing the frame rate of your game without affecting the resolution through the means of some upscaling algorithms. So let's go ahead and turn on DLSS. Let's see what the frame rate is now. So immediately the game looks a lot clearer. I can actually see Gerald's hair now more finely. And we are now hovering around 100 frames per second at 1440p at ultra settings. But we can take DLSS one step further. So in Witcher 3 The Hunt, you do have access to DLSS 3.0, and this is a new upscaling technology from Nvidia that does something different to the previous DLSS you may know. We can now take advantage of frame generation. So with artificial intelligence, we could potentially boost our frame rate even higher through the means of DLSS 3.0 by anticipating what future frames may look like. So if we, look at that. We were at 100 and now we're capping out around 144 frames per second at ultra settings, 1440p. Wow, so we've gone from about 80-ish frames per second to now 144. Or are we maxing out the refresh rate of the monitor? 1 second. Okay, so I stand corrected. We are reaching the maximum frame rate possible in Witcher 3. I thought this would be uncapped, but here we are at 144. But let's go ahead and apply some ray tracing. So let's go to options, video, graphics, and let's turn on ray tracing. And this will give you real-time, realistic lighting through the means of simulating backlighting, reflections, and so on and so forth across your whole game. So we have it set to quality, everything is turned on. Now let's see what the frame rate is with ray tracing turned on. Okay, you know what? There's an immediate difference in lighting I can see with the fire coming off of the torches, and we're now hovering around 105 frames per second. Not too shabby. Okay, there's one more thing though I want to mention real quick. In the Witcher 3, you do have access to Nvidia Reflex, which is a way of reducing the input lag between your monitor and the game. Now, by default, this is automatically turned on when I enable DLSS frame generation, but I'll go ahead and show you guys a better example of Nvidia Reflex in another game, like a first-person shooter, that can take better use of it. But anyways, to show proof, we have ray tracing on, DLSS on, all of these graphical features on, even Nvidia Hairworks, ultra settings on everything on the 4070 Ti at 1440p, all the graphical gizmos you'd ever want to enable on this game. We're chilling at around 100 frames per second at 1440p. Not too shabby. You know what though, I'm pretty happy with this. I'll leave it at that, and let's move on to the next game and see how much more performance we can extract out of this RTX 4070 Ti and all the features it brings to the table. Okay, next up we have Apex Legends, and I know what you're thinking. Why the heck are we running a game that should be easy for this computer? Well, you're right, it is very easy. We're running the game at completely maxed out settings, 1440p. But what I want to do is showcase to you how useful an Nvidia Reflex can be with this PNY RTX 4070 Ti. So here I'm on Apex Legends. We're gonna go ahead and do a firing range test, but just to show you the graphics settings. So you can see we have everything dialed up to the max, but here where it says Nvidia Reflex, it is currently disabled, and let's see how many shots I get. Bit of focus. Ooh. Oh, shoot. I lost some time right there. Reload. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Okay, we got 8 more seconds. Go. Ooh. Oh my God, I missed a few. That's pretty good. That is a new PB. I'm on fire right now. That is 89 without Nvidia Reflex on. Let's see what happens when I turn it on. So let's go into settings. Let's go to Nvidia Reflex enabled plus boost. Can I beat 89? That was a new PB. I better beat it. Hopefully I do. I don't know what the score is. I don't know what the score is. Oh! Alrighty, I got 3 more hits. I'd say in terms of accuracy, actually I need to check back at the recording. I got 3 more hits, and I was pretty locked in. Okay, maybe that was a recency bias, but there you have it. That's Nvidia Reflex on and off, and again, the frame rate is crazy high. And there you have it. That's what it's like to build, set up, and play on a high-end gaming PC in 2023. Once you complete a build like this, you're pretty much unstoppable in terms of what you can do in terms of gaming. Now, of course, building a high-end gaming PC doesn't have to look as glamorous as this because it is a little bit more complicated, but it's rewarding nonetheless at the end of the day. So I think this whole system in combination with the Height Y40, the RGB Corsair peripherals, and of course the PNY RTX 4070 Ti on full display is really awesome to see. And that should be obvious because you're spending a lot of money for a high-end gaming PC like this. And of course, once you build it, the gaming performance is superb. And especially with the 4070 Ti in particular, you can tap into features like RTX, Nvidia Reflex, and even DLSS 3.0 and take advantage of that ridiculous AI frame generation technology. So I have no complaints. I mean, at a gaming PC at this price, you should have none. But like I said, this will give you the best in terms of a gaming experience besides maybe going overkill on, say, a 4K gaming computer that can get even more frames per second. So all in all, I am really pleased with this computer. It does everything I ask it to for gaming, and that's really all I gotta say for this video. But real quick, I'm gonna give another thank you to PNY for sponsoring this build guide. Without them, I never would have gotten my hands on this RTX 4070 Ti and for creating the rest of the peripherals in this really cool looking build. So once again, if you wanna learn more about PNY and their graphics cards, RAM, or even SSDs, I'll have all of that linked in the description below. So with all that said, thank you so much for watching, and this is the Skydival channel, signing out.